Hi all, and welcome once again to All Things Cloud. In this episode, we're going to have a look at what options we have when it comes to blocking bring your own devices with certain OS versions from accessing Microsoft 365 resources. But first, let's have a look at my test tenant. As you can see, we have a couple of enrollment restrictions here. The main thing is that Windows devices, personal Windows devices, are not allowed to MD enroll to Intune. Besides that, we also have 4 conditional access policies that combined together will make sure that bring your own devices cannot access resources when they are not on a certain OS level. Now, this first conditional access policy requires a compliant device, and we're targeting the Office 365 suite. And I'll show you just the settings for most of these conditional access policies. Most of them are the same. There's an exclude on this one. As you can see here, it will exclude filtered devices from policy, and that means that every device that is Azure AD registered will not be targeted with this policy when they use the browser, I have to say. Now, let's have a look at one other policy. This one is going to block all bring your own devices from accessing Microsoft 365 resources, Office 365 again. We also excluded the browser. We're including one platform, but we are excluding every device that is Azure AD registered or Azure AD joined. So these devices will not be targeted with this policy. That means everything else will be. And the grant policy has been set to block access. Okay, there's another one. This policy will require users to accept terms of use, and including filtered devices in this policy, where every device that is not equal to Azure AD joined is included in this policy. That sounds a little bit strange, I know, but we're making sure that this policy only targets bring your own devices. And then finally, the last one. This is the actual policy that will block devices that are not on a certain OS level. In this demo, we're having a look at 19044 and 22,000. So Windows 10, 21H2, and Windows 11 devices are excluded from this policy, as well as devices that are Azure Active Directory joined. Now, here we have a virtual machine that's on 21H1. So the device should be blocked because our conditional access policy requires 21H2. Now let's see what happens. We're not registered, and I'm trying to sign in with a test user using the Teams application. And as you can see, I'm not allowed to sign in. I'll copy the information to Notepad so we can troubleshoot later on, where you might want to have a look at the correlation IDs. Okay, now let's try to register this device to Azure Active Directory. Proof with MFA, of course, and there we are. So now the device is registered with my tenant. just to show you once again, the device is on 21H1, and there's the conditional access policy again. So now we are in a situation that this policy shouldn't be applied to my test device because the device is Azure Active Directory registered. The required compliant device policy also does not apply because we're excluding workplace joint devices from that policy. Okay, now let's try Teams once again. And as you can see, we're still not allowed to access corporate resources using this device. And this is because although we're registered, the device still hasn't updated to the version I do allow to access corporate resources. So if I try to sign in with this account to any other Office application I have, you'll also see that the user is getting a block. So effectively, these conditional access policies combined are making sure that although I can register my device in Azure Active Directory, I still cannot access corporate data because I'm not on a current version of Windows 10 or Windows 11. Now let's have a look at another VM. This one is on the correct version, 21H2. So my conditional access policy should not apply. Okay, let's try Teams. Now, I still can't access corporate resources, and that's because my device is unregistered. So we're going to have to register the device first. And since we're registered to Azure Active Directory, we should be able to access corporate resources right now. So open Teams again, sign in with username and password, and see what happens. There's the next conditional access policy that kicks in, the terms of use. So we need to accept the terms of use because we've set the policy to apply on registered devices when using client applications. And we're in. So this virtual device has an updated version of Windows 10. That's one of the requirements. The user also accepted the terms of use I've set up. And as you can see, I can now use any application I want on this device. And it will also be protected with Windows Information Protection just to be a little bit more secure. Okay. Now let's shut down this device and continue with our tests. Here we have the third virtual machine, and that's a Windows 11 device. Okay, let's start Teams. So my block OS version's conditional access policy should not apply because this device is on one of the OS versions we exclude from the policy. Okay. So that was my mistake. Let's try it again. I'm not allowed to access Teams right now, and that's because I still did not register my device to Azure Active Directory. So let's do that first. Now the device is registered with my tenant. We'll start Microsoft Teams applications once again and see what happens. Okay, there we go. So this device now also sees the conditional access policy that requires users to accept the terms of use, and then will be allowed to use the Microsoft Teams application and access corporate data on this device. So there you have it, a Windows 10 updated version and Windows 11 device, both registered and able to access corporate resources. A Windows 10 device that is not fully updated. You saw that that device was not able, or the user on that device was not able to access corporate resources. Now, there is one thing you need to make sure users don't do when they use OneDrive on their personal devices. Just make sure they don't synchronize desktop pictures and documents, because if you have Windows Information Protection in place, everything that is going to be synced to OneDrive for Business will be protected with Windows Information Protection policies. So make sure you do have a good and solid communication and adoption plan for your users. Now, the last test will show a Azure Active Directory joined device, which is MDM enrolled to Microsoft Intune. Let's see what happens when we start Microsoft Teams on this device. And hopefully our policies will not apply. Okay. Now, conditional access policies should kick in if there was any issue, but you can see that I have set up OneDrive for Business. The documents are protected with Windows Information Protection as well, and I can also use the Microsoft Teams applications without any problem. Now back to our first virtual machine, the one that is not updated to a recent version of Windows 10. The device is not registered with Azure Active Directory. Let's have a look if I can access corporate resources on this device while using the browser, because I should be, and that's because the conditional access policies are excluding the browser. And as you can see here, it works as configured. There's one other thing we can test. Let's have a look at sign-in options. No, emails and accounts. That's a good one. Let's go to emails and accounts and try to add our account to emails and accounts. Choose Office 365. Give our username and password and see if we can add our account this way. Okay, we're not able to do so. And that's because we have a block conditional access policy on all applications when the device is not Azure AD registered. Now on the back end, we can have a look at the sign-in logs to better understand what happens when a user tries to sign in to Microsoft Teams on the first device. Let's start with that one. Now we are going to have a look at the first attempt, and we should be able to match the correlation ID that you see here with the error in Azure Active Directory, as well as the timestamp should match. Now let's start with this one. And have a look at our correlation ID and see if that matches the one we have in Azure AD. And you can see it does. So we're looking at the correct error message here. Status is a failure, and that's because conditional access is blocking it. Now the join type here is empty. That means the device is not Azure AD registered. And the authentication detail shows it's been blocked due to a conditional access policy. And when you have a look at the conditional access policies we configured, all 4 of them, or 5 even in this case, show a failure as a result. These were the conditional access policies we configured earlier. Okay, now let's have a look at a situation where Matt did register the device in Azure Active Directory and see what happens there. So the timestamp is a little later. This one should be correct. Okay, let's start from the basics again. So status still is a failure. The device info now shows it's Azure AD registered. And for the conditional access policies, you can see that we only have 2 with a result that shows failure. The other ones do not apply anymore, but the Block OS version and accept terms of use still do apply. I didn't manage to accept the terms of use, and the device is not on a current version of Windows 10. That's the reason why it's getting blocked. Okay. There's one other user, Jason Balboa, who did try to sign on a Windows 10 device that was updated. So let's have a look at his sign-in logs and see what we can learn from there. Okay, the device info at first is showing the device is not registered, but is on Windows 10 21H2. The conditional access policies all show failure as expected. A little later on, Jason registered his device with Azure Active Directory. And the device info should show, as you can see, the device is registered. The conditional access policies do not apply anymore, and I was successfully able to accept the terms of use. So that policy shows a success here, and all the other ones are not applied because the device has an updated version of Windows 10. It's not blocking the device anymore. Now that was it. Have a look at my blog as well at allthingscloud.blog, because I did an article on this topic, and you can use the video as an extra, but make sure you read on the blog to better understand what's happening here. Thanks again, and until next time.